I gotta tell somebody.
This is the best thing I've ever seen.
That. Let's talk about that.
You need this. Listen to this.
Memorable and exciting.
Well, then be less boring.
I'm going to tell everyone. Wait here.
Mighty remarkable, Big Daddy. Remarkable?
Welcome to Remarkable, a podcast for B2B marketers that deconstructs the most iconic moments in film, television, pop culture, and advertising for a single purpose: to give you, the B2B marketer, the same storytelling techniques that the pros use. In each episode, you will learn techniques from Hollywood, Pixar, Marvel, and beyond, from Spielberg's hands to yours, bringing remarkable content ideas to you every single week. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. This is Remarkable. This week, we're talking B2B marketing lessons from Days of Thunder with the help of our special guest, Director of Content Marketing at Fictiv.
Hold on a minute. Don't you think we ought to talk?
What, about how I'm going to run? Sure.
About how you've managed to live as long as you have.
Think you can drive?
Oh, he can drive. He can drive beyond the limits of the tires, the engine, the car, anything else.
There's nothing I can't do with a race car.
Ricky, how are you?
I'm doing great, Ian. How are you doing today?
I am doing wonderful. Excited to chat about Fictiv, Days of Thunder, maybe chat a little bit about how you think about content and everything in between. So why the heck did you pick Days of Thunder?
Days of Thunder is kind of one of those cult films. It was probably more popular back in the day and has kind of fallen to the wayside to some other sorts of films like Top Gun. But for me personally, it came out at a time that was kind of really formative in my youth. This was 1990 that it was released. I very distinctly remember watching it with my parents, and there's some things that I really appreciate about it these days. But this is like a time where sort of a time of innocence, or the types of films that were being produced during this time are, iconically American, and they have a tremendous amount of pride in being American. So like Top Gun was, promoting interest in the military, and Days of Thunder, which a lot of people criticize as being basically like a Top Gun with race cars, is kind of doing the same thing for American motorsports. And I don't know if I recognized it at the time, but it's a really beautifully shot film, and it really does a great job of getting you into the action, getting you into the race car, and showing the drama of a race that is really thrilling. And one of my other things that I didn't realize at the time is it has one of my favorite composers of Hans Zimmer, who does the soundtrack for it. So it's got a great look, tons of action. It's got Tom Cruise going for it, Robert Duvall, Randy Quaid, and others as well. That it's a really compelling piece.
I mean, also produced by Jerry Bruckheimer. I mean,
Exactly.
It's star-studded. Yeah, I think pretty underrated as we look back. And I think you're probably right that it did get a little bit of, I'll say, Top Gun malaise after, that was so popular. Also, hard to say peak Tom Cruise, because Tom Cruise has no peak. He just has plateaued at the top for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, whatever it is.
He just keeps on cruising.
So his name is Cole Trickle, which is pretty great in the story.
What's your name?
Buck Brotherton, what's yours?
Cole Trickle.
Yeah, Tom Cruise is 62. So, that's like 40 plus years of Tom Cruise getting after it. Yeah, I think you're probably right that it does get a little bit of that. But it's absolutely worth a revisit for today for all of the reasons that it's great and remarkable, and also all the reasons that it is marketing heavy, laden with lessons. Zoom now, tell us about your role at Fictiv.
Yeah, so Fictiv is a global manufacturing company, and we offer a lot of manufacturing capabilities to primarily mechanical engineers. So we're talking about manufacturing processes like CNC machining, injection molding, and 3D printing. So I joined the company, we're going on 3 years now. I joined the company as the director of content marketing. One of the things about marketing in the manufacturing space is marketing is not defining and then kind of driving demand for a product. So these mechanical engineers, they're either buying parts for the product that they're making or they're not. And certainly marketing has a role in kind of getting the Fictiv name in front of them, but it's not as though we're going to get in front of them with an ad and they're going to say, oh, I need to build a product now and I need to use Fictiv. So there can be like long periods of time between when these mechanical engineers are buying. So how do you stay in front of them? And Fictiv, even before I joined, decided that content marketing was a tool that could help them do that. So, mechanical engineers are inquisitive by nature. They're looking for education. They're looking to research or solve problems. And these are opportunities for content to kind of connect with them, get the Fictiv name in front of them, earn some credibility, and then hopefully do some of the other sorts of things for inbound marketing with regards to identifying them so that you can follow up either through email or through social media. So my role is to kind of help add some strategy to that. But also there's another component of this, which is something that I feel very strongly about and is super important to me, which is to really build high performance content and creative teams and help them off in the right direction with regards to company strategy and what the company wants to achieve.
Yeah, it seems like, especially when you're selling to engineers, not the most common sort of buying persona there, but you really have to sort of nail the content. Otherwise, it's all for naught.
Yeah, authenticity is super important. Like this is a very scrupulous persona. This is a persona that just, they are designed, they have this quality to identify things that are wrong and fix them. So if the content that you're putting out there is wrong, you can be almost assured that you're going to either hear about it or they're never going to do business with you because, it is so important that everything be authentic and be true.
Meredith, what the heck is Days of Thunder?
So Days of Thunder was actually Tom Cruise's idea, and it was really like a passion project for him.
That is Meredith O'Neill, our amazing producer extraordinaire.
He had been introduced to racing by Paul Newman, which I looked into Paul Newman. I didn't realize, I know who he is, didn't realize that he was also a professional racer, had a whole career as a professional racer until he was in his 80s. But so he had been acting with Tom Cruise on the set of The Color of Money. And so that's sort of how they bonded and started talking about racing. And so Tom Cruise was introduced to racing by Paul Newman, and they ended up meeting Rick Hendrick, who is NASCAR team owner, and Hendrick let them drive one of the race cars. And that was a real spark moment for Tom Cruise, who's I love this. And I read somewhere that he drove 180 miles an hour on his first lap in that car. They were don't get in an accident, okay? But so Tom was I love this.
Tom Cruise had never experienced anything like that. Not in sports cars, not flying his P-51 fighter.
Flying in a jet was glorious, but in a race car, it's a battle.
So he brought this idea to the same producers for Top Gun, like we mentioned, Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, and they just fell in love with the idea. And of course, their first choice for director was Tony Scott, who had also worked on Top Gun, surprise, surprise. And Tony was really critical in capturing this, the fast-paced sequences, giving this authentic feel to the racing scenes.
They're going to basically embed themselves in the culture that is NASCAR.
And so they all teamed up and they started shooting in 1989. And of course, they had some hoops to jump through, which I feel like we saw when we covered Moneyball as well, where they're having to work around the baseball schedules and things like that. So in this, they're having to work with the actual racing schedules because they were racing on real tracks with real cars.
Please don't wreck the car because this is a real race car.
Some of the cars were driven by actual NASCAR drivers like Richard Petty and Rusty Wallace. And they said everything had to be absolutely legal. They wouldn't let us just put a car in a field. So they're sort of jumping through these hoops. They also worked with NASCAR officials to make sure everything was legal. And then comes all of the logistics around where they put cameras. So cameras were really mounted everywhere on the cars just to make sure they could make these scenes really dynamic.
We put a camera in the front headlight, and we put another camera behind the right rear tire in the rear tail light.
So they had all these different shots to make it feel like you are there. And so every 10 laps, I guess they were running new film into the cameras.
Every 10 laps, I would come in and they take the entire camera out and put another camera in with a fresh load of film. It was crazy.
And so they were like, everything was done really on the fly. They even built their own car to do exterior shots. So everything's moving. It's really like engaging to watch these race scenes. But one of the things was like, they were facing constant rewrites. So like right up until they were filming each scene, like sometimes the scenes weren't like the lines weren't written. So they were like writing on the fly, doing all of this work right up until the last minute. And filming was also dangerous. So in one driving scene, Tom Cruise, they put cue cards for Tom Cruise on the windshield that he's supposed to be reading off of while he's also driving.
This sticker is dangerous and inconvenient, but I do love Fictiv.
And so he got in like this minor accident. And after that, they're like, let's give you an earpiece so we can feed you your lines. Like, I was like, why didn't you just do that in the first place? There's also another scene where like they had stunt drivers and the stunt drivers, you see it in the movie, they run into each other and the driver's side window like blasts, like it just shatters.
The other stunt guy hit me so hard that my head actually went through the driver's window.
The great thing about good stunt drivers, they go for the gusto.
Somebody says, you're bleeding a little bit out of your forehead. I never even knew. I still drive it.
He was okay, but definitely very dangerous. So they have all of this going on that they really face like danger and rewrites and all of this. So once they put out the movie, there was a lot that went into it. As far as like reception goes, I heard somewhere like, I don't know who said it, but someone in NASCAR didn't like the movie because they said it was like exaggerated and overindulgent. It did get mixed reviews, but it was actually like commercially quite successful. It made 157 million in box offices worldwide. I've read a couple places that's become like a cult classic, and I was like, is that good or is that bad? And I was like, I actually think that's really good, like as a lesson, sort of marketing lesson. Like, I think being sort of a cult classic or having like your niche, but like very passionate fans, I think is actually like a really good thing. A couple other lessons I thought could come from this is like working on the fly is actually kind of also a good thing to constantly be like trying to improve your content, constant reiteration and just like dialing in every bit of it, I think is a good thing. And then also like start content as like a passion project, because I think a lot of good can come from that. And like when you're passionate about something, you really put your all into it. And I think you really see that with this. But Ricky, I wanted to bring up that like you actually have experience as a race car driver. And so I want to play into that a little bit and just like, do you have the same gripe with the movie as like this person at NASCAR had? Do you think it was exaggerated and overindulgent based on your experience? And like, do you feel like there's a place for exaggeration and overindulgence in content?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the goal of a movie is to entertain the audience, right? And tell a compelling story. So sometimes, and this is why we like storytellers, is that you add that into it in the way that you deliver it. And yeah, like I agree with you with the importance of bringing passion to the projects that you work on. And this is so common for, folks that have an interest in motorsport, or they do motorsport. Is like, you just have to figure out, how do I get more of this? Like, how do I get paid to do this? Like, how can I actually do this? So one of the things about Days of Thunder that previous kind of cult classics, as you were describing it, failed to achieve was like telling a story that would appeal to a broad audience and doing that well. So I'm thinking specifically of, it's interesting that you brought up Paul Newman. So funny enough, when you watch now Cars, you'll know why Paul Newman was voicing the Hudson Hornet, right? So, but also like other actors that got interested in motorsport and then trying to figure out like, how do I make a motorsport film? Is like Steve McQueen. I'm sure none of you have seen Le Mans. It's basically, it was an excuse for them to go out and drive race cars and film themselves driving race cars. And it's funny that you mentioned that they were kind of constantly doing rewrites in Days of Thunder, is because I think even while they were filming Le Mans, they were trying to figure out, what is the story going to be, right? And it was almost as if it was just an excuse for them to go out and race cars, right? And then get paid to do it, to make a movie, right? And another one is Grand Prix. I forget the name of the actor who did that, but also one that was into motorsports and just figured like, how do I bring motorsports to my other passion, which is filmmaking and acting? So for me, it's kind of the same thing. And getting to talk to you all about it and try to figure out like, what are the marketing lessons that we can take from a motorsport film like Days of Thunder is really fun. and something that I can get excited about.
Yeah, I mean, another one too is Adam Carolla, who, races all the time. And he directed or co-directed and got made the movie Uppity, which is about Willie T. Ribbs. And he's like basically the Jackie Robinson of racing, who like broke the color barrier. And I think that that's like an important part of Days of Thunder, which is like, it's starting with this passion project where Tom Cruise like loves racing and wants to tell a good racing story.
I tell you, he was a pretty intense racer. He was crazy. He was fast.
It's so funny to me. Anytime you have anything like this, like you inherently in sports have a narrative that's so easy, right? It's like every sports story has a narrative that's easy, right? It's like there's the beginning period and you don't know if it's going to work, and then you lose, and then, you come back and then you win the final race. The audience expects it. The audience pretty much wants it. And so you just have to sort of color in the details. And it's clearly way harder than it looks. But this is why, like people love to make boxing movies, because boxing is really easy to shoot because you have two people in a ring. So it's very cheap. Shooting on a NASCAR racetrack in Days of Thunder is a completely different animal. And I think that that's the part that's so underrated about the film. Is just like the shots they get are incredible. And it makes you feel, closer to the NASCAR track than you ever have been before, right? Especially like you figure back in the day, in 1990, the footage that you're getting if you're watching actual NASCAR is like nowhere near what you're going to see when you watch Days of Thunder, right?
Indeed. Like, and especially if you're there at the track, like you have this very narrow view of the race as they're kind of going around you. I mean, it's a whole experience. You get more of the sound and the vibration and the smells and all that you get from actual track. But yeah, being able to, and I think film is the only way that you can do this, is to actually get in that driver's seat if you're not going to be driving it yourself, and actually seeing it that close and the intensity of the action.
I want you to go back out on that track and hit the pace car. Hit the pace car? Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other goddamn thing out there. I want you to be perfect.
I think you're right, Ian. I think Days of Thunder kind of really nailed a simple formula. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be profound. They did two things really well. They captured the action of the race, being in the race car, and they told a story that people kind of relate to. It's not a complicated story, but it was the combination of those two things and doing it really well that I think gives it some merit.
I think it was in the prep call and in your notes that you said it's sort of like the perfect popcorn movie, right? It's like, this is what we want from a movie on Saturday night, where you sit down and you want to be entertained, you want to see some cool stuff. And I think in 1990, that's as close as you get to, NASCAR footage, behind the scenes type stuff, right? Like, and I think, the dramatization and all the other pieces, I think, whatever, we don't care. The audience always forgives that stuff anyways, right? We know it's a movie, which is why I think you see maybe some critical, again, malaise around the story, whereas fans, I think, generally like it. The public generally likes it more. And again, like at the time, the movies that were out that were featuring NASCAR or, racing in general were a little more hokey, right? Like you didn't get the in-depth sort of, Bruckheimer-esque version of this. So that's what made it cool. I remember the ads. I mean, I was super young, but I remember seeing the ads for this and just the shots that they're getting, of it. And you're like, this is crazy, just like seeing the up close and personal, seeing inside the driver, doing all that stuff. And again, you can't do that in real NASCAR, because you can't cut a car in half and, or have another car, driving next to it and shooting and doing all those things. And I think that, to put a finer point on it, that, yeah, it doesn't have to be a 10 out of 10 story. It doesn't have to have a massive twist. It doesn't have to have all that. You have great acting, an incredible cast. It's shot extremely well, and you're doing something that's different and giving people sort of like access to something that they didn't previously have access to. And all of a sudden, like, thumbs up, right? Like that. And I think that especially in marketing, we like want to have like the perfect story, or we want to have, the perfect shot, or, the perfect everything. But you just got to know like one of those areas in the triangle. Like you can either make it look really cool, you can make the story really cool, or you can give access to something that people would normally have. And it's like, if you do 2 of those 3, like, you're probably in good shape. If you do 1 of the 3, like, probably not.
Yeah, I agree. And like what Meredith was saying is, especially for projects where you have passion behind it, you can get through some of those things, right? And you can push through and bring to life this thing that, is facing challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that Tom Cruise is the way that he is. And it's like, this is all mystery anyways. It's like, who knows why it matters? But like, Top Gun Maverick was cool because we knew that all the actors had to go fly in planes and were puking their guts out and doing all this stuff. Like, I don't know why that matters, but it does. Like, we care. And maybe it makes the film better, maybe it doesn't, but like, I tend to believe it does. I mean, like, and Tom Cruise driving 180 miles an hour in a car, like, that's crazy. And of course, only like he would do that, right?
I'm dropping the hammer.
And maybe that's how he locks in, but like, I mean, he crushes every performance and he crushes Days of Thunder. So, it's like, just to me that you feel that in the character. I think you feel it in the story. And again, if the script isn't perfect or if they're writing the lines on cue cards, the day of the recording, maybe you feel a little bit of the clunkiness there. But overall, I don't think, you leave it with a bad taste in your mouth.
Yeah. And I think to some extent, not having everything sort of rigidly scripted can help bring, what I was saying before, like authenticity. It makes it feel a little bit more organic if you're coming up with something on the spot there. I think that's that's inherent in the process.
Meredith, did you give what the actual story is?
I did not. Okay, so Tom Cruise plays this NASCAR newbie, Cole Trickle, who we mentioned before, and he's challenging this veteran racer, Rowdy Burns, and they build sort of this rivalry, but they both end up getting injured, and it's while they're recovering that they become friends. And meanwhile, while Cole is like getting treated, he falls in love with the doctor, and the doctor is Nicole Kidman.
Feel your vision's restored?
Oh, I think so.
Nothing's blurred, you're not seeing double.
Which I think is amazing. And this is actually how they met. And this is like where their sort of relationship started, blossomed. And so I feel like, speaking of authenticity, like this is like a real, like their chemistry is real on screen, which is cool. And then once he's recovered, Cole decides to race Rowdy's car in the Daytona 500 against this new racer named Russ Wheeler. So that is the sort of gist.
That's a good setup, right? And when you have 2 like pantheon level actors together, you get it going.
Yeah, I didn't realize that's how they met. But I agree, like you can actually see the chemistry that they have.
But again, it speaks to the authenticity, right? Like,
exactly.
Part of the thing with this is about authenticity. Like, he really wanted to race these cars. He wanted to tell the story. He fell in love with his lead. I don't know if him and Robert Duvall were friends, but they sure did a great job on set.
Yeah, I mean, they sold it. Like, one of my favorite scenes is like when they're not performing well and Robert Duvall and the pit crew are basically like, no, can't come into the pits. We're having ice cream.
I got a pit. I don't think so. We're busy now.
You're what?
We're eating ice cream. Ice cream!
So they're all just eating ice cream and just kind of not even paying attention to the race. And so Tom Cruise angrily runs into the pit and like jumps over the wall and starts chasing after Robert Duvall. And it seems fun.
So good. Okay, marketing lessons from Days of Thunder. What do you got for us here, Ricky?
So, marketing lessons that we can glean from Days of Thunder. There is this really beautifully shot scene in the early part of the movie where Robert Duvall's character is designing and building the car for Tom Cruise and the team. And, he's going over it. It's shot in almost a way like it's an iPhone is being designed here. And so he even like stops and talks about how it's going to be perfect. He's going through all the technical details and the minutia of how this is going to be the best race car. And then in the next scene, very next scene, the car is getting literally physically destroyed as it's out on the racetrack. And this is the scene where Robert Duvall's character is like,
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you, he rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Is one of those iconic lines from the story. Tom Cruise and Rowdy. What's the name of the actor who plays Rowdy?
Is it Michael Rooker?
Yeah, that's it. So Yongdu from Guardians of the Galaxy. Just a great lineup of actors, right? Cary Elwes is the other one. He's the third racer that comes in and takes Tom Cruise's spot on the team while he's recovering. So great lineup of actors. So anyways,
Oh, yeah. Cary Elwes is Russ Wheeler. That's right.
So yeah, it like in the very next scene, Michael Rooker is basically
I'm gonna pull this rookie
destroying Tom Cruise's car. This beautiful machine that Robert Duvall's character has been building. And it just, I think a lot about like planning and especially like project management. So I think that the lesson for marketers here is just the recognition that things are not going to go according to plan, that you need to build in some agility and the ability to kind of compensate when it comes time to actually execute here. And that's not to say that the whole planning process isn't useful. I think that both Churchill and Eisenhower are quoted as saying something along the lines of, plans are basically worthless, but the planning process is invaluable. So it's not as though those efforts in designing the race car to be the best race car was wasted effort. But when it comes time to execution, you have to stay agile and you have to stay, on the ready. And again, I think like the lesson for marketers is during that planning stage, take time to think about those contingencies. Take time to think about all the things that can go wrong. And if and when they go wrong, how are you going to respond and how are you going to react? It's not possible to think through every single scenario, but your ability to kind of anticipate things that can go wrong and be able to compensate for them will enable you to perform and react quicker and continue forward with speed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. All right, next one.
Okay. So we're actually kind of going through this chronologically. So in a later scene, the team is not performing well. And we're starting to see like the fact that they're really not communicating well is kind of the underlying issue. Tom Cruise doesn't trust Robert Duvall. He thinks that Robert Duvall's character is trying to change the way that he drives. And of course, people are resistant to change. And Robert Duvall's character just doesn't understand why Tom Cruise's character isn't listening to him and just doing what he says. So there is this scene where they're sat down with the team manager, and the team manager basically says, listen, guys, if we don't get our act together here, we are finished. He basically says, like, to Tom Cruise, like, you're an excellent driver. And he says to Robert Duvall, like, you're the best crew chief I've ever worked with. But if we can't figure this out, then we're finished. So the two characters meet up at a bar, and it basically turns out like Tom Cruise's character does not understand what Robert Duvall's character is talking about because he's a driver. Like he understands the dynamics and he has that sort of seat of your pants sort of feel for how to drive fast, but he doesn't understand like the technical nuances of like how a car works. So some of the inputs that Robert Duvall's character is looking to hear from Tom is to like how the car is behaving. And, Tom doesn't know how to communicate that. He doesn't exactly know how to verbalize it. And I think that the lesson for marketers here, it just emphasizes the fact that when you're on a team, you need to be speaking the same language. You need to have a shared lexicon so that there is this transmission of understanding, right? You need to know what's working. You need to know what's not working. And you need to know what you're talking about. I mean, how many conversations or how many arguments have we had where it just kind of comes down to just like a basic fundamental misunderstanding of, I'm talking about this, but actually you're talking about that, right? I think this can be the foundation for trust. I picked up a practical application of this from our CRO. Her name is Joanne Moretti. And I learned this when I was first joining her team at a previous company. I think it's fairly common for there to be conflict between especially marketing and sales, right? They're both involved in sort of the end-to-end buying process, and there can be sort of like these gray areas of who's responsible for what. And one of the ways that you can overcome this, of course, is by having a shared language. And one of the things that Joanne thinks is really important for building up trust, especially with like sales, is to understand and adopt the KPIs that the sales team are going after. So, for example, one area where marketing and sales kind of become misaligned is, marketing likes to talk about like big metrics, like impressions, eyeballs, even things like conversions, right? But these are KPIs that really don't translate well into the sales world. Like they are interested in leads and they're keeping an eye on sales and revenue and things like that. So, her point is like, make those metrics your metrics and understand how your activities, how the marketing activities roll into those KPIs. It's not to say that you don't keep track of impressions and a lot of other things that kind of get labeled as vanity metrics, but understand how you go from an impression down into eventually revenue.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think that when you look at, the rubbing is racing line and things like that, where, I almost sort of looked at it the opposite way, where like that's the marketing person talking to the salesperson, where the salesperson wants to go fast, and it's like, a deal hasn't closed, or, they've ghosted us 5 times. It's like, yeah, they've ghosted us 5 times, but they've also like, engaged with like 15 different pieces of content on our site. They're probably just not ready to buy yet. Like it's sort of the rubbing is racing sort of reminds me of, it's not budget season yet,
I'll pile on there, like sales is a contact sport, right? So rubbing is racing too.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But I think that is the misnomer is, it's like each person is trying to get them to see it their way, when in reality, you should just try to seek the truth of what is happening, right? Is like, you're both working towards the truth of the situation, right? It's like Robert Duvall's trying to explain how the car works. He's trying to, go fast and be instinctive. It's like they're both right. He needs to be able to use the information so that he can be instinctive. And you also can't, have someone who has, their life is on the line at any given second, right? And they have to feel comfortable with the whole process. They also can't be inundated with information, right? I kind of look at that too as, how much information does the driver need to know at any given time? Well, it kind of depends on the driver, right? Some people want to know how the physics work, and other people want to know, hey, do X, Y, or Z. So it just depends on the person and how they process. There's actors that would want to have the lines already written, and then there's actors who are okay, like Tom Cruise having an earpiece in one ear, and so he can say the lines, right? So it's like, it just depends on the person and what they feel comfortable with. And I think that's like part of the communication, right? It's like figuring out how you work best. Number 3.
Yeah. So our third lesson is actually why I was excited to do this podcast. And this comes from a presentation that I gave earlier this year. And it really involves burnout. So like, I love wordplay. So this one is just like perfect for me. There is a scene, and it's kind of related to what we were just talking about with the second lesson with regards to communication. There's a scene where they're trying to figure out like how to actually perform better. And here's where I get to kind of nerd out in terms of motorsport. By the way, like if you had told me years ago that I'd be so interested in like tires as a subject matter, like I would have thought you were crazy, and I would probably be slightly depressed with where my life was heading. But when it comes down to it, racing really is all about like tires. They connect the race car to the road, and they're obviously super important. And this isn't just in motorsport, like this is just in everyday driving. Tires are really, really important. So in racing, there is what's called the limit. This is what race car drivers are constantly trying to find and stay on, is this limit. And what it's referring to is the limit of traction of the tires. So the saying is that tires can do 3 things. They can accelerate, they can turn, or they can stop. But they can only do one of those things at 100% at a time, right? Anytime you go over that, that's over the limit. So in the movie, what's happening is, in Tom Cruise's character, his quest to kind of find ultimate speed, he's actually overdriving the tires. And he's driving faster than they can. And what happens when you're overdriving the tires is that they get greasy and they start to degrade faster. So this is a problem, because if you destroy your tires, then you have to come into the pits, and that takes time. And then, now you're behind somebody that you were ahead of before. And so again, this is an area where the two characters are not communicating well about what's happening here. So Duvall's character kind of gives this ultimatum, and this is at the point where they're actually starting to trust each other, and so they're getting a little bit better teamwork going on here. He says, "Listen, all right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to drive a certain number of laps, and you're going to drive it like you normally would. And then after that, you're going to drive a certain number of laps, and you're going to do it my way, and we're going to see how it happens." So there's this really great scene where they drop the two tires next to each other. You have Tom Cruise's tires, which are torn up and they're destroyed. And then you have Robert Duvall's tires from the way he was coaching him to drive, which are sort of pristine, ready to do more laps and drive fast. And he has this line that he says, "And my way was 6 seconds faster." So in fact, not exceeding the limits was the faster way of driving the car. And so, like I said, if you're overdriving the tires, you're effectively leading to burnout. And so I think the same is true when we think about high performance teams. You know, the best that somebody can perform is at the limit of their abilities. And there are times where it's important to kind of push beyond our limits, but that's not sustainable, right? Even driving, it's okay every now and then if you overdrive the car and you get, a little bit of a slide, you can correct for that and bring it back in. But if you continue to do that, that's what leads to burnout. And of course, that is in the long run, the slower way of performing.
It's such a great analogy, and I love it. The way that so many teams are run, because you're constantly sprinting to this, to that, to this, to that, to these big launches, to, this big thing, and you got to do everything. There's a natural sort of like cyclical nature already to the business because you have quarters. Most people are beholden to end of quarter, especially salespeople are obviously beholden to end of quarter, which means marketing should be beholden to end of quarter. So they're trying to do things there. We know when those sort of times are, you know when you got to change the tires. But if you're running too hard and, all the time like that, then you probably just won't be able to be successful. It's one of the things in making podcasts and video series that I've noticed is people are so obsessed with launch and they're not obsessed with episode 50, right? It's like the biggest lesson that I would give someone if I was like, how to make a great show is like, start with episode 50 and work your way backward, right? It's like everything is easier, better, more consistent. If you're like, if I can do this for episode 50 and I can repeat that 50 times, then we're going to be good. Whereas people do the opposite, whereas like they put so much effort into launch, which like who has ever watched a show on episode 1? You know what I mean? When did you start Breaking Bad? You didn't catch it on episode 6. You started watching it in season 3 and then you binge the first 2 seasons, and there's so many things like that, especially with sort of like the endless nature of content now. The idea that you're just going to like strike it rich and like everybody's going to pay attention to the thing that you created right then and there, the day that it dropped, is like pretty silly to me to begin with. It's all about, you need to win the race at, lap 500. And people are like obsessed with the first 5 laps. And it ends up being kind of short-sighted or extremely short-sighted.
And here again, like that's another area when you're thinking in the long run, another area where the passion can really help you get from 0 to 50 and sustain that effort, right?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, any final thoughts on Days of Thunder here?
Not specifically about Days of Thunder, but maybe just to expand a little bit more on the question of high performance teams. So I think that the risk of burnout isn't just simply a top-down risk of management trying to get the most out of their team. I think it's like especially important in high performance teams where you have a group of highly driven individuals that are willing to push themselves to perform well. I think that's something that managers actually need to be really cognizant of. I always tell my team, like, I'm not going to tell you not to work in the evenings or work over the weekends. I'm also not going to tell you not to do that. I'm going to trust you to make that decision for yourself and choose to do it strategically. I do constantly ask them like how they're doing. I think this is important for managers to do, especially with their high performers, to make sure that they're not overdoing it and potentially, running the risk of burnout. I think that like one of the things that's really key and a takeaway that we can get from, athletics overall, not just motorsport, is that when you look at like high performers, the example that I give is like, if you look at Simone Biles' face when she's competing at the Olympics and she's giving like a championship winning performance there, she's not stressed. She looks perfectly at ease. And in an even better scenario, she looks like she's having fun. And I think that's so important to have that sort of environment, and especially for managers to create that sort of environment for their teams, that they can really relax on and just focus on the execution that they know how to do. They've been training for it. They've done it for years. And in this, at this time, and in general, like there is no 110%. You can only do the best that you can at the peak of your ability. You can't give that extra 10%. So like forcing you to do that is actually going to have a detrimental effect. So I think that's just super important to keep in mind for marketing teams.
That's great advice. Before we get out of here, we'd love to hear just anything that's working for content at Fictiv and how you think about, creating content for a very, targeted audience.
I think marketers in general just need to have a very good understanding of who you're connecting with, who you're marketing to. And I think generally we do a pretty good job of that. Again, I think that authenticity is so important for a very targeted audience, and especially one that is extremely cognizant of inauthenticity. So the struggle that marketing has in the manufacturing space is most of us are not engineers. My dad was an engineer. My father-in-law is an engineer. I like to think that I bring an engineering mindset to the marketing that I do. But if you're going to ask me about like the properties of copper, like I'm not going to be able to do that. So it's so important to be able to work closely with subject matter experts, identify who the subject matter experts are at your company, and make them like your best friend, tap their mind, and constantly figure out like, is this somebody, how can I give a voice to this person that is not a marketer perhaps, and maybe is not even comfortable like talking to an external audience, like, but that authenticity is often what needs to come through in order to form strong relationships with a company and with a brand. Because I think ultimately, and especially in this day and age where social has had such a huge impact, I don't think people are looking to form relationships with brands like they did, 10, 20, 30 years ago. I think they're looking to form relationships and connect with people. So how can you as a marketer facilitate those types of authentic engagements?
Yeah, your job as a marketer is not to accelerate your brand's thought leadership. It is to accelerate the thought leadership of the people in your space and be responsible for the forums that allow those people to share and connect. You know what I mean? It's just a very different thing than before.
Yeah. And we were talking about this before, but it's worth repeating. Is like, I think that's one of the great things about the podcast format, or, doing a video series, is you get to get a sense for who these people are, not just like the talking points that they're giving, but like, what are they interested in? Is there anything relatable with regards to that? And are they just feeding me lines because that's what the marketing team said is the best way of saying it? Or do they truly believe it, right?
Ricky, wonderful having you on the show. For listeners, you can check out Fictiv, all the cool stuff that they're doing. Check out the state of manufacturing report that they did, which is pretty awesome. If you know some engineers, give them a nudge. Ricky, any final thoughts? Anything to plug?
Yeah, if you haven't watched Days of Thunder, go on Amazon Prime or your favorite streaming service and go and watch it, and grab a bowl of popcorn and enjoy.
Thanks so much, Ricky.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Meredith.
Well, that's it for today. I hope you got some good ideas for your B2B content. Thank you for listening to Remarkable. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. Remarkable is created by the team at Caspian Studios, B2B podcast as a service. Caspian also creates fiction series for B2B companies, so if you want a business thriller, you can learn more at caspianstudios.com. Hollywood-style storytelling for B2B. And in today's episode, you heard from myself, Ian Faison, and Meredith O'Neill, senior producer here at Caspian Studios. Remarkable was produced this week by Meredith O'Neill, mixed by Scott Goodrich, and our theme song is Solomon by Falak. Be remarkable and rise above the noise.